Hello, today we're going to talk about my one of my favorite movies, Braveheart. Now, if you notice my background, it's not in California. This is actually cityscape of Edinburgh. So it's kind of fitting that we're going to be with this backdrop of Scotland to talk about Scottish people. Now, as I said, I had to do a second take because the first time I did it, I went through the YouTube checks. It says some of the things I'd done had copyright materials. It's not a bar, but just to be safe, I just kind of took everything off, and I'm going to re record this video and release it a little bit late just so I can get everything right. That way I don't get into any problems, and I'm going to try to do a lot of this without some of the funny clips that people like to do. But it's kind of good. You have to trust my memory and trust your memory of Braveheart if you have seen it. The first thing I want to talk about is, first of all, say, hey, there's a lot of things that Braveheart has gotten, I guess, right, but all things that they got a lot wrong. Why I still watch this movie? Because it's one of my favorite movies anyway, right? There's sometimes after, as a military historian, after having studied some of the history and the time periods, you kind of have to wonder, can I still enjoy this movie even knowing after all the things that has gone wrong? And you look at some of the Wikipedia or IMDb notes and as to what they've got wrong, it's like, yeah, I can still get this. I can still enjoy this. Patriot is one of my favorite movies, but having studied quite a bit about the Southern theater of the American Revolutionary War, especially the life of Francis Marion, yeah, I can still watch The Patriot. Yeah, I'll still, if it's on TV, I will watch it. Braveheart, same thing. If it's on TV, I will watch it. So without further ado, this is my take two, and I'm going to start with a little thought exercise to kind of help you guys shape the story. Because as I said, I always talk about the historical backdrop. Now, imagine this is the year 1125. So we've gone back 900 years. And if you look at England, if you look at the map of England, you will see that there are actually four sovereign nations, all right? England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. Those four are now part of the Kingdom of Great Britain, right? That's fine. United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's the full title of England, but the British Island, whatever. It's just a lot of things that have gone into the history of England in the United Kingdom. That's what it is now. But back then, just 900 years ago, there were still four countries. You fast forward about maybe like 50 years. This is now about the year 1175. Ireland is now part of England, right? There's a long history with the Ireland being sovereign kings. They'll have its own sovereign nation. They'll have high kings, and then somehow the uh, long story. Basically, the Normans invaded Ireland, and so now Ireland is now part of the overlordship of England. You jump forward a little, maybe another 50 more years. Now it's what the year 1225, and then you go forward just maybe another 25 more years. This is now the year 1250. Wales is now under the overlordship of England. Just in a short, basically 100 years, we went from four countries to just two. That's England with all of Ireland and Wales underneath it, and Scotland. And this is kind of where Braveheart begins. The story begins. As you listen to the prologue and the narration, that Scotland is now in even further more turmoil because not that long ago, in 1286, the last king of Scotland, whose dynasty has been around for about 400 years, is gone. There's no king. The king died childless. Whatever other heirs they had, just gone. Like, and now you have other nobles who have legitimate claims to the throne by, blood or status, blood and status. And they're not going to be pushing forward and say, hey, based on my relationship to the previous king, I am a legitimate claimant to the throne of Scotland. And there'll be three people whose names become familiar. The top three contenders by that time are John Balliol, Robert the Bruce, and John Comyn. And this is kind of like a situation where what do you do if you're a small nation and a bigger neighbor is looking at, and you're bordering a much bigger neighbor, and now if you're the small nation, so, and you have an issue with who's the next king of your country. Now, with the constitutions like the United States and some other federal republics and the democracies, we have a strict, documented continuity of government. If the president, then it becomes a vice president, and it becomes Speaker of the House, and then it goes on the list. And by statute, the United States Congress has said this is the succession of government. With the royalty, you don't, because it's all based by blood. If your family is gone, your family is gone. So now what do you do? So let's talk about Wallace. Sir William Wallace is going to be one of the biggest characters in Scottish history. He's kind of their George Washington. He's their Abraham Lincoln, or he's their Teddy Roosevelt. He all rolled into one. And he's going to be almost mythical beyond belief. But there are certain things that we kind of know about him and certain things that we don't know about him. And so from what we do know, we can kind of at least build a picture of the man. And sometimes the sources will come from various different things, not just the books, but other documentaries have kind of looked at Wallace. Well, first thing about Wallace is that he was a lowlander. He's not from the Highlanders. Yeah, it looks like Scotland and everything is the Highlands, but that's not true. If you talk to Scottish people or English people who lived up the north, they will tell you that yes, certain parts of Scotland is lowland. It's just kind of flat, low hills, not exactly like the upper the high mountains. And so therefore the lowlanders actually don't wear kilts. You see the movie now, everyone's wearing kilts. Like, I guess no. I mean, some of the people do wear kilts and some people don't. It's only the Highlanders who wear kilts. The other thing that we do know is that Wallace, we don't know exactly which clan he belonged to. I mean, two or three different clans claim he is William Wallace was born in their clan. Does it matter? Yes and no. I mean, yes, if it's a matter of pride, but in the long story, because he's claimed by every Scot as Scot, as opposed to, oh, I'm of clan this or I clan that. Now he has this, he is adopted by all Scottish people. Even the Highlanders, will say, yeah, Scott, William Wallace is, the pioneer of Scottish independence and the guarantor of Scottish independence in an age when England under King Edward I has his eyes on uh, pretty much the world, you could say, or at least the northern part of Europe. And with Wallace, we do know actually, based on the movie, he looks like he's this lower class, free, you know, farmer with his own plot that he inherited from his father and older brother. Right? That's his land. So he is kind of landed in the sense, but he looks kind of poor, looks like every other villager. But according to this one other document I've seen is Willis was actually a lot more educated than you think. Wallace actually has been trained and taught. Why? Because his family also had more wealth than you think. In the Middle Ages, especially the High Middle Ages, one of the biggest imports that kind of drove the economy in Europe was English wool. England had kind of pioneered and produced a lot of wool that was in high demand. This is like exactly now. I mean, you think about some of the cashmere wools that are from England. Sure, like you go to England, you buy actual wool, like real wool from their country. That's a different high grade wool that you can't get anywhere else. And that was kind of the economic drivers. And if you kind of got into that, or you kind of were part of the upper echelons of society, you actually had more money to get educated. Now the movie sounds like that makes that Wallace went overseas to get training. He got learned a lot of stuff. We don't, I mean, sure, it doesn't matter, but he did learn. He was as educated. He would have learned certainly Latin and maybe French. So when you see the scene with Wallace meeting Princess Isabel of France for the first time. Yeah, sure. The scene starts in English, and then this her one of her advisors accuses tries to speak in Latin to kind of speak his opinion without not thinking that Wallace understood as a Scot would have not have understood Latin. And then Wallace says, "Look, I understand exactly what you're saying, and if you want, I can talk to you in French too." So that kind of put everyone on a this, whoa, why you speak my language. I've done that before. I've been to like overseas, and yeah, I understand exactly what Chinese people are saying, even though I don't want to talk about it. Sure, I can converse to them in Chinese, but and just don't forget, if you look at Europe at that time, England, Scotland is literally at the ends of Europe, like northern end of Europe. There's no other country that is like they're pretty much the most north country in Europe, and the centers for power and commerce were further to the south. So anything that is in Scotland is kind of like, who are these people? I mean, Scotland is a country? I mean, sure, they know, but it's kind of a joke. But in all seriousness, that if you look at geographically in a time with not in digital age, Scotland is at the far end of the world. Uh, but at the same time, it is not completely isolated because in the 1200s and all the way into the 1500s, Scotland and France had a long political, cultural interchange. I have people there are Scottish people with French last names. And that's going to be, you think about that, like Scottish people with French last names. And so that shows you this interconnection between Scotland and France. Now, this is going to be very important for England because that's because England's right in the middle between Scotland and France. And this strategic line is going to make England very nervous. Like, well, if these two unite, then I get the Scottish armies in the north and French armies coming from the south. Who do I fight? Well, you try not to, in a sense. There are times of war, which happens, and then there are times of peace. And don't forget that England and France also have their own long history bound by blood, since some of the English kings were technically sovereigns and cousins of the French kings. That's going to make it very difficult to interweave. And as you get to the Hundred Years' Wars, that's going to start maybe a few, just 50 years short after the 30 years of Braveheart. It's going to be this massive war that between England and France, and plus all the other countries that whom they have blood relations to pull into the fight. But that's a different story. When you look at Braveheart, England, France, Scotland were all kind of interrelated. Now, what we do also know about Wallace is that I think that's one thing that everyone agrees on is that the English killed his wife. That is one thing that pretty much every historian kind of agrees on. Yeah, he had a wife, and then the English killed him. The English killed her. So is that sort of rebellion? Maybe, but don't forget there are also other factors besides one man's wife getting killed by the enemy. Now we come to this Battle of Stirling Bridge. If you watch the Battle of Stirling in movie, there's no bridge. Where is the bridge? Where is it? That's one of the most critical part of the story. When you look at if you do watch it and you see the slide, it says Stirling. Where's the bridge? Where's the bridge? This is one of the biggest blunders in the movie where I'm going to harp on is where's the bridge? And this is the crucial to the story of Braveheart's and how that's one of the biggest inaccuracies. Now, when you watch the battle itself, it is epic. It is this cavalry charge. It is stopped in its tracks by the Schultron, which is this Scottish infantry, long spears. And the English just didn't realize, wow, the Scots can beat our heavy cavalry because heavy cav at that time was the king of the battlefield. And then so if you have a bunch of Scottish infantrymen with long spears, this stops you short. It can be a shock psychologically and tactically. Like, wow, my biggest weapon on the field has been removed. Because let me explain what happened at the actual battle a Sterling Bridge. First of all, Sterling Bridge today is much more sturdy construction, but back then in the 1200s, it was a very narrow wooden bridge. And there's only maybe a handful of people that can cross at the same time. And therefore, it's going to take a while before the entire English army can cross the bridge and array themselves into battle and then fight the Scots. Now, the Scottish people were well outnumbered. The English army was anywhere from like, at that 10,000 to 12,000 to a lot more than that. The Scottish army was not a very large army, and you can see the disparities in numbers. Even that's depicted correctly in in the movie. And the convention was because it's supposedly warfare is still supposed to be chivalrous. The You're supposed to allow the other side to deploy their full army before you can attack, and that was supposed to be considered chivalrous. Well, Scott Wallace is like, I can't do that. I'll be outnumbered. 3-1, 5-1, 6-1. I can't do that. And what he did was he let the English vanguard cross the bridge, and he waited until there was a lot of men still to cross. There's just enough men in the front to uh, not be able to retreat, and then the rest of the English army was still trying to cross the bridge, and so they're not all jammed together. There's no other way to cross the bridge. There's not you can go 200 miles, 220 miles up or 20 miles downstream, or 3 miles, even 3 miles upstream downstream to kind of cross. No, and he waited for them to at the right moments when everyone's jammed the bridge, then he attacked. And this is supposedly a breach of the Warfare Convention. But Wallace is like, I don't care because if I wait for a fair fight, I will lose. So that's why you never win a fair fight. You never seek to win a fair fight. And Wallace creamed the entire English vanguard. He just smashed the entire army so that the English army broke for the first time in ever. Right? They never considered having. So it's a shock that way too. Now, when you look at the who died and who lived in on the English side, it's actually reversed. In the movie, the younger looking English commander gets to get on his horse and ride away to safety, while the older one gets decapitated by Wallace. But in reality, that was actually flipped. The English commander, who was actually his name's John Sir de la Warenne, he was a 66-year-old. He was tired. He's been fighting for most of his adult life. He just couldn't hack it. He's actually stayed, well before behind and in safety in bed in this one castle. While the younger commander, a guy named Sir Hugh Cressingham, and he was the one who took the field and lost. And when they caught him, the British was just tortured to death. The Cressingham, who had been this known and hated tax collector in Scotland. So when the Scottish people got him, they flayed him, literally flayed him alive. And that's where the kind of reversal of roles were in the movie versus in real life. When we talk about the Plantagenets, we're going to have there are three people. Obviously, Edward the First, Longshanks, Edward the Second, at the time Prince, and Edward's new bride, Queen Isabel. Now, this is one of the things where the movie got the timing 100% wrong. In the movie, the wedding of Edward and Isabel was depicted at the beginning of the movie, where it's kind of implied that it's 1200s, 1290s, early 1300s. That's false. That actually happened a good 10, 7+ years later. This is the late 1300s. This is the 1300s O's. So, basically 06, 07, 2000, until 1310. And don't forget, Wallace died in 1305. Therefore, he never, ever, ever met Princess now Queen Isabel. That is 100% fiction. That is the biggest thing that is different in Braveheart versus reality. It's just that entire relationship is 100% fictional. Now, we do know that Isabel did take a lover, and his name is Roger Mortimer. And that's an Agatha story that you can read in full from one of the book sources that I read for this video is a guy named Dan Jones. He wrote the history of the Plantation Dynasty, and there's a lot more information that you didn't see in about the wedding. Now we get to Edward II. Was he gay? More technically, he's bi. He probably bi. In the story, in Dan Jones's account of the wedding between Edward II and Isabel, Edward's kind of, you can say, well, let's use my term, BFF, a guy named Pierce. He was actually at the head table. And actually, he spent more time with, and Edward spent more time with Pierce than you can see with Isabel. It's kind of like weird things where, now you think about some of the modern weddings today where there might be a formal head table or for the bridal party, and then that's it. The wedding party gets to sit at the head table, and then everyone has their assigned tables, and then kind of as half the night progresses and drinks are flowing and people start dancing, and the happy couple is making their ways to around the tables to kind of get toasted and to meet some old friends and thank you for coming. The seating arrangements just becomes meaningless because I've sat when at another table talking to a friend whom I haven't seen in a while. Right. But if you're in England with a much more stratified society, you're not going to be mixing with people. Now, everyone's kind of noble to some extent, but if you're going to spend your entire wedding, however much political it is, with your best friend and talking to him, and versus your wife, you can give you the wrong impressions. Even in that was true in 1305 versus it is in 2025. But at the same time, Edward and Isabel did have children of their own, at least one, which is Edward III. And he is going to be a very crucial part in English history as he contributes. His children are going to be the reasons why the England fights what they call the War of the Roses. And that's the story of the plantation family. It is as bloody and as creepy and as disturbing as it is. Don't forget, in Braveheart, they renamed him from Pierce to Philip, so it's kind of a different guy, but it's kind of closely to he's Edward II's best friend, right? However you want to say that. And now we come to Robert the Bruce. In the movies, if you've seen him, he's just this weak-willed man. He's caught between his father, he's caught between the example Wallace to fight for what is right as opposed to be a nobleman, which is kind of backstab each other until and maneuver for position and power. In reality, Robert the Bruce is a lot more controversial than you think. Yes, he's going to be one of the great kings of Scotland. Yes, he's a very inspirational story before winning the battle at Bannockburn. At the same time, there's a lot of things that if you read his story, yes, he was actually a murderer. Okay. The story is that, as I mentioned, the three contenders with John Balliol, Robert the Bruce, and John Comyn. Robert the Bruce and John Comyn decided to kind of meet at a church, and they're supposed to have this agreement on holy ground, and the argument got heated, and Bruce actually killed Comyn. You don't see that in the movie. It just makes Bruce a little more sneakier and bloodier than the movie. You can kind of empathize with the movie version of Robert Bruce, where it's kind of like, yeah, I'm like, I want to, when he shouts at his father, I don't ever want to lose heart again. A lot of people want to say that too. Look, life has given us a lot of difficulty, and I don't want to lose heart ever again. That's the line everyone can get behind with. But with this disparities and Bruce is kind of like, well, who's the real Bruce? I mean, is he kind of this conniver, or is he kind of this kind of a little bit of both? I think that's where the movie magic and Hollywood has kind of twisted the and kind of changed the portrayals of a certain person without really saying anything. And as for whether Robert Bruce or William Wallace ever met, I don't know. I've heard one story. So yes, they would never have met because they were still in different circles. You know, Robert Bruce, remember, he's still of the Scottish nobility, and Wallace was a high-ranking commoner. You would have while they're still operating, I think they would have either known each other, even though they. I don't think they started became friends. And I don't think William never tries to uh, make this handshake with Bruce and say, unite the clans with me. I would follow you. That's movie magic and movie storytelling. In real life, if the two men have never met, then it's kind of one of those weird things. But if they kind of have known each other, I think they would have known of each other. With all this things I've said about Braveheart, at the end of the day, I love those movies. There's nothing wrong with it. But the soundtrack is amazing. The scenes between Wallace and Isabel, that track is called "For Love of a Princess" and has been covered by several of my favorite performers. That is one of my favorite tracks, and it's just this the movie has this sense of evoking strength and manhood and love our country. Uh, the hilarious thing is that my brother mentioned that after a Scottish person told him, like, after watching Braveheart, I never felt more proud to be Scot, and I want to find the nearest Englishman and punch him in the face. That is kind of the power of great storytelling. It if you after watching this, you might think, maybe Braveheart isn't that great. No, trust me, it's a still a great movie with all these different things that have happened, both politically and geopolitically. That's it for me for today about all the blunders in Braveheart. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Hope to see you again.